All right, let's go ahead and get started. Leslie, why don't you go ahead and start our forum?
Okay, good evening and welcome to this candidates forum for the 42nd Virginia House of Delegates District. My name is Leslie Torigny, the moderator of this event and a member of the League of Women Voters of the Fairfax area. We are an organization with over 500 members committed to nonpartisanship. I would like to welcome our candidates, Mr. Edward McGovern and Ms. Kathy Tron. We appreciate their taking time to talk to us tonight and to answer questions on various issues that have been submitted by our members and other attendees. We thought last year was an aberration, but here we are again, back in a virtual mode. Because of an abundance of caution, we are doing that again this year. We are pleased to partner with a number of community and service groups in sponsoring this forum. We are all nonpartisan, nonprofit entities. Like the League, our partners are committed to supporting the democratic process by providing these opportunities to meet and question the candidates, compare their responses, and encourage community participation. We are grateful to our many volunteers who have worked tirelessly to put together this virtual event. We particularly thank all of you for attending tonight. I'm sure you have a lot of exciting things going on at home, so we appreciate that you took the time to be with us. As we in the League like to say, democracy is not a spectator sport. We all have to engage to make it work. We need to know our candidates, their values, and their positions on the many issues important to us. And I can assure you that there are many issues important to us. We look forward to a lively and respectful discussion of the issues. Let me go over the format. All candidates certified to appear on the November 2nd ballot were invited to participate. These candidates will each have 1.5 minutes, 90 seconds for an opening statement, 1.5 minutes to answer each question, and 2 minutes for a closing statement. Each candidate will have the opportunity to answer the same questions. The opening statements will be delivered by the two candidates in the order their names appear on the November 2nd ballot. Mr. McGovern will go first with his opening statement, followed by Ms. Tron. For the questions that follow, Ms. Tron will answer the first question first, and then I'll alternate back and forth between the two candidates as to who answers a question first. And the candidates, once again, will give up to 1.5 minute answers to your questions. Our timekeeper will provide 30-second, 15-second, and stop alerts to the candidates so they know their time is up, and we will follow the timing rules strictly. The League of Women Voters will record this event and make it available on their YouTube channel. After the forum, candidates will be sent a list of the questions that have been submitted, but due to limited time remain unasked. They may post answers to some or all the questions on their websites. And now, let's get started. So, Mr. McGovern, would you like to—
Recording in progress.
Mr. McGovern, would you like to make an opening statement, please?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the League of Women Voters providing the forum. I'm Ed McGovern. I am the Republican nominee for delegate here in the 42nd. I'm a retired federal employee. I spent a little under 35 years working with the Department of the Army with resource management, manpower and dollar programming. Longtime resident of the 42nd. My wife and I moved here when we came back from overseas, early 90s. My kids grew up here. And they went to public schools, ended up graduating from South County a few years after it opened. I was involved with, they were growing up with the community with some youth sports, baseball, basketball, did some like director stints. I've liked living here. It's been good. We picked Fairfax County, my wife and I, because we felt the schools were excellent. I have a concern there. Big reason that I am running. I think we are losing focus on academic excellence in the schools. It does not look good. Business environment has changed. We are not number one for business anymore. That is a problem. People feel less safe. So I want to stay involved with the community. I want to take some positive actions forward. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, next up, Ms. Tran, your opening statement, please.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Leslie, and to the League of Women Voters and this team for putting on this conversation. It's so important. And I want to appreciate everybody who's joining us tonight for participating in this election. Thank you so much for your time. I'm Kathy Tran, and it has been an incredible honor to represent our community in the Virginia House of Delegates. I am the Democratic nominee again for this position. My husband and I, Matt, have 5 kids, and we live in West Springfield. And I have spent my entire career working to help families achieve their American dream. I spent 12 years as a civil servant at the U.S. Department of Labor, and then went on to work in immigration advocacy at the intersection of immigration reform and workforce development. I first ran for office in 2017 because I was really compelled to stand up for the values of hope, opportunity, and freedom that my family had risked our lives for coming to the United States as boat refugees from Vietnam. And I'm incredibly proud of the progress that we've made during my tenure. We have provided resources to make sure that families and small businesses are able to recover from COVID. We've expanded healthcare to 550,000 Virginians, increased investments in K through 12, lifted up working families through raising the minimum wage, and taken significant action on climate change and making Virginia more welcoming and inclusive. I look forward to our conversation tonight, to sharing some more of the work I've done, the progress we've made, and to hear all the other questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both very much. Now let's get on to the questions. Our first question begins with Ms. Tran. What, in your opinion, is the best way we can balance state public health, especially in light of COVID, with the economic needs and environmental risks in this state?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Leslie. I think it's really important that we are able to ensure a safe economic recovery for everybody. We are still in the midst of a public health pandemic. You know, there have been to date on the Virginia Department of Health website, there have been 858,000 COVID cases in Virginia, and 12,592 Virginians have died as a result of COVID. And I know it was really hard to be super buttoned up, particularly last year during the height when we were trying to understand through science what was the safest way for us to interact again and be together. And I think we have to understand, if we are rushing towards an economic recovery and opening up without those safeguards, then we may risk not having customers come in. We may risk workers getting sick, and that doesn't help anybody. So I'm really proud of the work we've done to provide relief to small businesses that have been affected through COVID. We've given significant tax relief for businesses affected through the unemployment insurance tax fund, as well as grants directly to businesses and nonprofit organizations that have been impacted by COVID. And at the same time, we've provided support to families that have been affected, whether it's rent and mortgage relief, whether it's additional resources to help schools address COVID learning loss. We've tried to make a significant balance in ensuring that we're able to open safely and that Virginians are comfortable with reemerging post-pandemic.
Okay. I'll repeat the question for Mr. McGovern. What, in your opinion, is the best way we can balance state public health, especially in light of COVID, with the economic needs and environmental risks in this state?
Well, we need to be transparent with what we're doing, and we need to stay away from extended states of emergency. Going over a year is simply too long. And when we were doing these things, we kept certain things open, say liquor stores, Planned Parenthood clinics. It wasn't clear to people just exactly what the problem was. Some things got closed, some things didn't. Okay, so we needed to have more input We need to stay away from mandates. They need to be short. Once you have a mandate, you stop talking about things. You stop talking about the benefits and costs. We need to take a look at that. Okay, there's been probably a sole focus on COVID without factoring in the costs that happen when people lose their jobs, when people lose their businesses. Okay, so eventually we're going to need to move back to opening up. Okay, we need to take those steps for that. And the biggest thing is allowing discussion, which has been not really there. We simply, get a state of emergency and then told we're going to have a series of mandates, and that has just shut things down. Hasn't helped. We need to put out a lot of information, just what the impact of COVID is. It has hit people seriously. A lot of things do, but we need more input from all sides regarding how we handle COVID.
Okay. The next question begins with Mr. McGovern. Do you believe that vaccines and/or COVID testing should be required in the workplace? Explain why or why not.
I think vaccines are a good idea. I think mandates are a bad idea. As far as requiring a vaccine, a lot of people have gotten the vaccine, and that it has helped. There's been major movement for that. When you start requiring it, I think you're giving a boon to big pharma. You're giving a lot of money to special interests, and I don't think it's proven that we really get a benefit from mandating the vaccine. Most people are going to decide to get the vaccine. Most people did. Okay, I think that moves us forward. And as far as the cost of people getting it, people are going to have to make decisions on their own. There's reasons people don't do that. A lot of people have had COVID and they don't want to get a vaccine. That's not factored in when you start doing a mandate. So I think there's definitely a problem, along with several other items. We need to be open-minded and need to consider again, when you do a mandate, you stop talking about things and you stop looking at benefits and costs.
Okay. Ms. Tran, do you believe that vaccines and/or COVID testing should be required in the workplace? Explain why or why not.
Great. Thank you so much. This is an incredibly important issue. And as I just said, we've had over 800 or nearly 858,000 COVID cases in Virginia, and 12,592 people have died here in this state alone. Currently, some of our hospitals in different parts of Virginia that don't have high vaccination rates are facing decisions as to how to determine care and bed shortages in their ICU. That's happening right now in Virginia. What we've seen is that people who get vaccinated have lower they don't have as high serious cases in COVID. And we've seen that the CDC and FDA have approved the COVID vaccine, just as they've approved vaccines for tetanus and polio and measles, mumps, and rubella, things that we have to get, that we're mandated to get in, to go to school, for example. So I do believe it's important to mandate vaccines or COVID testings in workplaces, particularly for workers that are dealing with individuals who may be immunocompromised or who are unable, because of their age right now, to get vaccinated. And I think it's really important to keep us all safe and treat this vaccine as we would any other vaccines that we've had throughout, my childhood and ongoing right now.
Okay. Next question, Ms. Tran. How should the state support the resettling of the Afghan refugees?
Thank you, Leslie. First off, our refugee resettlement policies and frameworks and the numbers of people who are allowed into America through the refugee resettlement program is established at the federal level through Congress and the president. But states do have an important role to play in refugee resettlement. And as we have refugees who are coming, facing a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, many of whom were partners with the US military during the war there, or who have stood up for human rights and civil rights and are now at risk, are coming here to be resettled. I think it's important that we create a welcoming and inclusive environment for these individuals. I currently, from my own experience coming as a boat refugee, have asked the state to look at the workforce challenges that refugees face. We have sometimes people who are highly skilled, who are able to jump immediately and contribute to our economic growth. And we want to make sure that they're able to do so. What are the challenges and barriers they may face so that we can tap into their talents? And for others, how do we make sure that they're well positioned and have the skills and opportunities to be able to provide for their families? Whether that's looking at English language classes, looking at our workforce training programs, or just making sure that they're well networked. There's a number of different things that we could do as a state. And I'm so glad to see so many of my neighbors directly here in West Springfield being so welcoming and inclusive right now for our refugees.
Okay, Mr. McGovern, how should the state support the resettling of the Afghan refugees?
Well, we are running for delegate in Richmond, and we don't have much to do with immigration. We will work with the federal government as they come in, but we're going to turn back to them. They're going to give us X number of refugees. We're going to need to make sure that this is not an unresourced requirement that's forced on us. We need to turn back to the federal government very quickly. We pick up federal funds for quite a few things, especially in Northern Virginia, regarding education, transportation, along those lines. One thing we certainly want to do is offer vaccines and do COVID testing. If we have a lot of requirements for folks. We don't want to set up a two-tiered system, which we tend to have a lot of times, especially when we have illegal immigrants coming in. They are not subject to the same rules as most other folks. Again, we've been bringing in refugees into Virginia. We've been bringing immigrants into Virginia, for quite some time. We pretty much do what we're doing. We have to prepare to get the economy open. And that's important. That's critical to a lot of things, just about anything that you do. Okay, so basically, make sure this is not an unfinanced requirement that the federal government puts on us.
Okay, Mr. McGovern, next question. Virginia's minimum wage rose to $9.50 an hour in May 2021, the first of 3 increases that will culminate at $12 an hour in 2023. According to research done by MIT, the required living wage in Virginia for 2 adults and 1 child is $17.78 per hour for each working adult. Explain what steps, if any, will you take to bridge this gap?
Vibrant economy. Basically, the minimum wage is subjective. It's not something that I think should be imposed statewide. If we're going to have a minimum wage, it should vary from regions throughout the state. It should be taking a look at the cost of living in an area. Basically, most people don't want to work for minimum wage. And the idea, we spend an awful lot of time talking about minimum wage when really it's, for the vast majority of workers, it's a temporary status. It's not something that they stay with for very long. The amount of time we spend on this, it's not worth it. So basically, we want to look for opportunities. Open up the economy. We're going to, again, open up the economy, get that moving. We want to have a lot of support for small businesses. They are critical. They provide a tremendous amount of opportunity. It's very hard, for people down there at the bottom rung to break into the large corporations, federal government that we have. So basically, we really want to provide flexibility, which I don't think is happening out of the current makeup down in Richmond with small businesses. So that's where we want to grow.
Okay, Ms. Tran, Virginia's minimum wage rose to $9.50 an hour in May 2021, the first of 3 increases that will culminate at $12 an hour in 2023. According to research done by MIT, the required living wage in Virginia for 2 adults and 1 child is $17.78 per hour for each working adult. Explain what steps, if any, will you take to bridge this gap?
Thank you so much. Unlike my opponent, I believe focusing on the minimum wage and raising it is incredibly important. It's important to so many families and their dependents who are working day in and day out and making minimum wage. When my parents first came to the United States, they worked in low wage and minimum wage jobs. And I just want to point out, in the early 80s, minimum wage was about $3.35. That has more purchasing power today than it did in the early 80s. So raising our minimum wage and being on a path to $15, Leslie, we have to revote on it, but we are on a path to 15 by 2026, I believe. It's something that it's been a hard fought gain in Virginia, and it's incredibly important. Would I like to see that be even a more aggressive timeline? Absolutely. And if there's the political will and votes in Richmond to continue to increase that, I think that's really important. But a $15 minimum wage is a floor, and it's also really important to allow localities to be able to set their own living wage, where you have a minimum wage for all of Virginia and the ability for localities to understand what their the economy in their region demands and be able to set that higher. But I think that's a little bit aspirational right now in Virginia. But what you see right now are businesses who are having a hard time hiring, who are raising their wages in order to attract workers. So thank you.
Okay, next question, Ms. Tron. What policies would you support to make sure all kids have access to great early learning experiences? Do you support an expansion of early learning programs such as Head Start in Virginia?
Thank you. I have 5 kids and was used to serve on the board of the Childhood Developmental Center that my 3 older ones attended. And I firmly believe that having a strong early education experience goes a long way for the rest of your life and your successes. And I think there's a lot of data that backs that up. I'm really proud. In Virginia, we've expanded the preschool initiative to include 4-year-olds, and we're exploring how to fund that for 3-year-olds. We've also expanded funding eligibility for funding we've received through the federal government to make sure that families with just a little bit of a higher income are able to access this support. What we understand is childcare and early childhood education is critical. It is important infrastructure to help our women and working families be able to work, not just for the success of our kids. And so I hope that we will be able to continue to get funding and expand our preschool initiative here in Virginia to some of our most vulnerable families.
Okay, Mr. McGovern, what policies would you support to make sure all kids have access to great early learning experiences? Do you support an expansion of early learning programs such as Head Start in Virginia?
Well, like a lot of things, Delegate Tran has been working on down in Richmond. This is not a big issue in the 42nd. We have a hardworking, well-off community here in the 42nd, and we have lost focus since we switched over to my opponent as far as focusing on our community. Okay, we have an excellent school system. It was considered excellent right along. Okay, but Mr. Grant, I don't know who the Head Start is for, but it's not a critical here in the 42nd. Just as along the lines that Medicaid expansion is not a critical item or issue in the 42nd. But what happened with that is that a lot of people in the 42nd, self-employed, were hurt with that kind of thing. So the more you're getting government involved with people who don't need it, it hurts it. It takes resources away, and specifically there. Okay, and we're moving along things with a lack of focus. Okay, and we seem to be moving with a lack of focus on academic excellence in the schools. And so why we think the Head Start is going to help there, it doesn't. Okay, we've had the 42nd. We need to be focused on our community here. These issues are for, I'm not sure where they're for. They're not for here. They're for some large city somewhere, not here.
Okay, Mr. McGovern, next question. Lack of affordable childcare limits the ability of many women to return to the workplace or continue their education to allow them access to better paying jobs? What policies would you support to ensure parents have affordable childcare so they can work and/or go to school?
Again, we're not talking about the 42nd here. My wife and I, we raised our family here. We were part of the community. We see people throughout the community. People handle themselves. They are better off when they are able to use their resources to handle themselves. We don't need constant government intervention. Okay, it's not helpful for the 42nd. As far as my wife and I, she's as far as her career goes, she ended up higher up on the ladder than I did. It is something that you work out as a family, and you're better off being able to utilize your resources and establish yourself. You don't need to get drawn into a bureaucratic mess, which is what happens. You start getting a ton of rules. People want to follow opportunity. Okay, and they have a lot of chances of that around here. Either working for the federal government, being involved with small business, and people have been able to be self-employed quite often here in the 42nd. People need the freedom to work for themselves, and that has worked very well for my wife and I. It's worked very well throughout the 42nd as a community.
Okay, Ms. Tran. Lack of affordable childcare limits the ability of many women to return to the workplace or continue their education to allow them access to better paying jobs. What policies would you support to ensure parents have affordable childcare so they can work and/or go to school?
Great, thank you. I alluded a little bit to this earlier, Leslie, and in the conversation about preschool. I just want to be really clear. Throughout this pandemic, I've heard from numerous families in the 42nd District who are struggling to pay for childcare and asking if there's any relief. And I was just knocking on doors and chatted with a father who was asking me, is there any way that we could help him with his childcare needs, and was able to provide him the information I mentioned about the expanded eligibility for the federal program. And so that is clearly a need here. And like so many families who are watching today and who are living in the 42nd District, I know what it's like to have to balance work and remote learning this past year, or childcare needs, and when you're trying to work. So I'm usually, if you see me on my Zooms, I have a couple of my kids in the background doing their thing as well. So this is a really important issue. Two things that we've done just this past session I'm proud of. One is, how do we make sure we have a stable childcare workforce? One of the things we did was allow some portability with the background checks that childcare workers have to undergo to make sure that they, kind of meet all the requirements. But if you change your jobs and you have to go through that process, it can take a really long time for you then to be able to start. So under certain conditions, you have some portability of that background check. The other is, we've started a pilot to see how to best subsidize childcare. This is a bill that State Senator Jennifer McClellan introduced and I supported. I'm really looking forward to the outcomes of that pilot and seeing how we can take that to scale. Childcare is important infrastructure for our families in the 42nd.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Tran, next question. How can Virginia best address racial inequality?
Thank you. There are so many aspects to the issue around racial inequality that we have made some progress on and continue to need to do work on. Part of that has been in our criminal justice reform, for example, understanding the effects of no-knock warrants, understanding the effects of chokeholds, understanding the disparities of the death penalty has had on Black and Brown communities and communities of color. We've ended all of those practices in Virginia. For example, we've increased investments in our education system, particularly in the schools that have at-risk youth. These are often Black and Brown youth and youth of color, and wanting to make sure that those schools that are helping to educate some of our most vulnerable youth get the additional resources they need. We've also increased support for our TANF families and connecting families who are on TANF to workforce opportunities. That was a bill I carried. And lastly, around, just want to highlight some of our work around healthcare disparities. We have made midwives and doulas more accessible in Virginia, knowing that Black women have high mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, and wanting to make sure that we're able to address that. And the last piece that is critical is the effects that voter suppression has had on our Black and brown communities. And in Virginia, we have gone from being ranked 49th to being ranked 12th in the country in an expanding access to voting, understanding that voter suppression is has no space in Virginia and needing to address that. So those are just some examples.
Okay, Mr. McGovern, how can Virginia best address racial inequality?
Well, I want to see your exact examples. Yeah, there is some issues going on. Certainly, something that happens as far as disparate impact. You will see that in prisons, crime statistics. Someplace else you will also see it is in abortion. When we have a choice as defined as taxpayer funded through birth. There's certainly disparate impact on some folks, and I think they don't feel too valued or welcome, in Virginia, which I would like to see change. I think there's no question about that. I think we need to have an honest discussion about what's going on. The crime disparities have not been there for very long. If you go back certainly 100 years ago, that the prison population looked a lot different, and I think we might want to see, what happened there. Certainly, as some folks have moved for voting more heavily with the Democratic Party, they have not done well. Whereas before they were much higher up on the economic rung with professional development and educational achievement. So I think you want to stay away from being dependent on the government and look for freedom and establish yourself. And we have a very good situation, I believe, with law enforcement in Virginia.
Okay, next question, Mr. McGovern. Considering Virginia's location and dependency on its coast and tributaries for commerce, tourism, and defense, what measures do you support to protect marine and coastal assets?
Okay, again, I saw this question, before. This is a very interesting question, considering we're running for delegate. This is a vast subject. I think we've been doing a fairly good job. I ran for the Soil and Water Conservation Board. In no place in Virginia are we considered in crisis. We're pretty much status quo as we've gone along, but we do pay attention to it. We want to consider where you put development, but I think we want to shift our priorities to other areas. This is just something that hasn't hit all that well. We really want to pay attention to a vibrant economy, makes everything better. Move that along. We want to pay attention to listen to everybody, to be inclusive, being inclusive, which we're losing in education. Okay, we've had a very polarized situation in Virginia in the 42nd as far as the issue of life goes. Okay, we don't have people listening to that. So as far as moving off onto discussing estuaries, I don't think that's really all that helpful. There is not something that's noted as having a crisis. So there you have it.
Okay, Ms. Tran, considering Virginia's location and dependency on its coast and tributaries for commerce, tourism, and defense, what measures do you support to protect marine and coastal assets?
Thank you. I think our communities along the coast, many would agree that they are facing the effects of climate change in terms of increased flooding. And how that impacts their ability to have a vibrant community and also daily life, right? And I think what's really important is that we are able to address these effects, protect our natural treasures and biodiversity. The 42nd is currently, the district is partially bordered by the Potomac and Occoquan rivers, both of which are part of the Chesapeake Bay. And so we have done a couple of things. We've invested historic amount into Chesapeake Bay cleanup and also to helping farmers with their water and soil pollution that affects the bay as well, making sure that they have the resources to meet these goals. We've increased attention to taking climate action. We passed the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which is really important, sets us on a pathway to having a carbon neutral electric grid by 2050, also increases our goals for wind power and solar power and makes solar much more accessible. So these are some examples of the steps we've taken to make sure that we are addressing climate change and addressing some of the coastal resiliency issues that our communities are facing in Virginia. And I recognize that I serve the 42nd district, but my votes here also affect all of the other parts of Virginia, and that's really important to know.
Next question. The coronavirus pandemic has highlighted the consequences faced by working people, especially working women, when they lack access to paid sick days and paid family and medical leave. How do you propose addressing this problem legislatively?
This is an incredibly important question. And this past year, we were able to provide 5 days of paid sick leave for our home healthcare workers. And that was a huge win in the Virginia General Assembly. But unfortunately, that is not enough because it does not affect all workers and ensures that everybody has an opportunity to make a decision about staying home when they're sick or needing to care for a sick family member. That is also an incredibly important public health issue because you wouldn't want people who are sick to come into the workplace and possibly get others sick, right? That affects people's health. It also affects productivity and so on. Unfortunately, I supported and I wholeheartedly support making sure that Virginia offers paid sick leave and paid family leave. We were able to pass those two bills out of the House, and I supported them, but they failed in the state Senate. So right now we have the votes in the House, but we don't in the state Senate, and it requires a little bit more education, I think, with our state senators in terms of why this is important from a public health perspective and an economic perspective and such. And so I think that's a conversation that I'm willing to continue to have because it's really important to our community here in the 42nd, but also to all workers in Virginia.
Okay. Mr. McGovern, the coronavirus pandemic has highlighted the consequences faced by working people, especially working women, when they lack access to paid sick days and paid family and medical leave. How do you propose addressing this problem legislatively?
Well, this is something that goes on for quite a while. I think government getting involved in running businesses is a bad idea. It makes it too close. What tends to happen is that we get more big corporations, big business, and smaller businesses are hurt by this. This is borne out. You'll see people down in Richmond who run small businesses, Republican and Democrats, don't like to see the flexibility taken away from running a small business. Generally, larger businesses and the federal governments provide this, and this is fine. Now, an example of an organization that does not seem to want to provide paid sick leave because it says it has a cost and it's hard to deal with is Planned Parenthood. They're not interested in providing that. And it's a classic case of there's a business, they're saying, hey, this is a cost. We don't want to bear it. This is what you hear. Now, a lot of people move, between various small business jobs. That's what happens. And pretty much we were shut down during the pandemic. So as far as trying to move in and establish something, permanent off of what is supposed to be a surge situation, go back to manpower days, is not a good idea. The cost has just never been, considered to be worth it, for people looking for job and a lot of flexibility.
Okay, next question, Mr. McGovern. What will you do to facilitate broadband expansion in Virginia?
Well, this is something that we would need to be read in on as far as broadband goes. This is something that the market is going to bear out. You can try and make an imposition, or we're going to have to work with our neighboring states as far as working for particularly rural areas, because that's probably that is where it's weak. Its expansion. But yeah, as far as the broadband, it could get expanded, and we have to make sure that there's demand for it. You sit outside an area that doesn't have that much of it and say, okay, well, they must need it. We're not for sure. We've had some situations where we tried to, legislators from Northern Virginia have tried to do something for rural Virginia, and actually they weren't interested in having it done for them. It's considered very important, but I don't hear that much from rural Virginia. And again, we represent the 42nd. I want to focus on our community. The 42nd, we have things, we're very concerned about education, the quality of the schools here. Okay, and that's my priority. We're losing focus on academic excellence. Okay, we're losing a business climate, and we need to focus on the 42nd here. That's my job. Going down to Richmond, if I can work to establish something throughout the state, that is fine. But my first priority is our community.
Okay, Ms. Tran, what will you do to facilitate broadband expansion in Virginia?
Great, thank you. Broadband is an issue that affects clearly Virginians who live in rural communities, but it also affects people who live here in our suburbs and also our urban areas. Throughout this pandemic, we saw the importance of broadband, the ability to work remotely if you had that option in your job, the ability to learn remotely because our schools were closed for safety purposes. We had students who were sitting outside of our public libraries. I'm right here in Fairfax County trying to access the internet. We've had schools working with our cable providers so that our students could get low cost or free devices to be able to access, hotspot devices to be able to access as well. So it's definitely an issue that impacts our community. Through the American Rescue Plan, the American Rescue Plan, the big COVID package that passed Congress, Virginia received over $4 billion. We have put $700 million into expanding broadband in Virginia. And this investment will get us to universal broadband access by 2024. That is going to be a game changer in terms of economic growth throughout Virginia, including particularly our rural areas as well. But it will also affect our neighbors here in the 42nd.
Ms. Tran, next question. Some people are distrustful of government and information. How can trust be restored in our democracy?
Thank you. It's always been really important to me to be accessible to my constituents. In 2020 alone, my office put out 84 newsletters. So that's sometimes more than once a week, but we wanted to get out information about what was happening with COVID as quickly as possible so that people had real-time information. We also held 17 town halls. We used, for a long time, a conference phone line. Then we switched over to Zoom. Prior to the pandemic, I hosted town halls in person. And so 84 newsletters, 17 town halls in 1 year, trying to understand the inputs and concerns and priorities of the constituents and neighbors. And it was also really important for me to share that information about the work I'm doing and what's happening in Virginia. So if you're watching in the 42nd District, I hope you sign up for my newsletter. But I also know another aspect of distrust comes from how campaigns are financed. And we're truly the wild, wild west in terms of campaign finance laws, where candidates can use their campaign funds for personal items and donors can give unlimited amounts. So I just want to be clear, I have put in a bill to limit personal use of campaign finance funds, and that's being studied right now. I'm also have pledged never to accept funding from our utility monopolies, and look forward to making sure that we're able to pass strong campaign finance reform. I've been endorsed by End Citizens United, which is working hard towards that goal. And that's really important, I think, to increase transparency and rebuild trust.
Okay. Mr. McGovern, some people are distrustful of government and information. How can trust be restored in our democracy?
Well, to start, we should probably start remembering that we live in a republic and not a democracy. I think there's an issue when we constantly hear that. Something else, we get a lot of directives and things that we have to do from political leaders, and then we turn around and find out no, they're not wearing masks. And the first chance they get, they don't do it. They're not following the rules. There seems to be different sets of rules for different people. It's pretty obvious. We can see that. Yeah, Virginia is a very interesting state, and especially Northern Virginia. It's been taking a lot of money from out of state. My opponent has been getting quite a bit of money representing special interests. Something we could certainly do is stop tax dollars. The less tax dollars go into special interests, the better. And Planned Parenthood comes to mind very fast. And I think that should be stopped. And also need to take a look at some industries are regulated and some aren't. And Planned Parenthood is one that does not meet standard medical procedures. They're gifted, they get to walk on that. They don't have a lot of reporting requirements that a lot of people do. Okay, that's an issue. We seem to have waivers for certain people. We've had a lot of incidents with politicians, and I can really understand why people can see that, hey, special interests get a lot of treatment. So we need to send fewer tax dollars, special interests, the better.
Okay, Mr. McGovern, next question. A vast majority of Virginians support universal background checks, red flag laws, and licenses for gun ownership. Please explain the policies, if any, you support to address gun violence in Virginia.
Well, we need to recognize how these questions are put. I've been hearing about, there are universal background checks that exist. When you have this big of bureaucracy, it's been obvious that some mistakes have been made. However, something else that is constantly brought up is the gun show loophole. Well, anybody listening tonight, I asked them to go to a gun show and try and buy a gun without a background check. You're going to need to get one. The red flag laws, we're talking about due process here. That is going to be a problem. Those things also disproportionately impact minorities and women with those situations. If you dig a little deeper on these things become a problem. We need to have a respect for the Constitution. Okay, and there's been a problem. There's been some attacks on the Second Amendment, okay, which is part of the Constitution. There was a process to change that, and it's been used quite a bit. That needs to be stepped forward if you actually want to effect change. Okay, and these attacks have been shifted to other parts of the Constitution. This is dangerous. Okay, so essentially, when you approach this, you must have respect for the Constitution. Okay, and you got to keep in mind, basically, when we have incidents, there seems to be a lot of impact on law-abiding citizens that don't have anything to do with what happened with gun violence. There is a proven method for reducing gun violence. Put people in prison. It's a small number of people.
Okay. Ms. Tran, a vast majority of Virginians support universal background checks, red flag laws, and licenses for gun ownership. Please explain the policies, if any, you support to address gun violence in Virginia.
Great, thanks, Leslie. Virginia is the home of the NRA, and it's been a long time coming for us to be able to pass common sense gun safety policies. So I'm really proud we were able to do that in the last 2 years, some significant ones, and you've identified a couple of them. We've expanded background checks. We haven't gotten quite to universal yet, but we've made significant gains. We have passed a red flag law that has saved lives, making sure that people who might be a harm to themselves or others don't have access to guns until a judge identifies them as being able to then access again. We've closed the Charleston loophole, which gives law enforcement more time to conduct background checks. We've allowed localities to determine their own gun safety policies so that each locality can assess what type or not guns that can be brought into their buildings. We've kept guns away from domestic abusers. We've reinstated the 1 handgun a month law that was repealed, and Virginia was kind of the center of access to guns in order to run them up and down the eastern seaboard. So I think those are all really important steps that we've taken. They all stand to be repealed if we lose our majority in the House, but those are policies that I support and continue to support ways to make sure in Virginia every year we lose about 1,000 people to gun violence, and we need to make sure that we are keeping each and every one of us safe. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Tron, next question. Virginia ended the past fiscal year with a record $2.6 billion surplus. What are your thoughts about how this money should be allocated?
Great, thank you so much. First off, I think one of our, I just want to clarify, because I think I heard earlier a different statement. Virginia is the #1 place to do business. The CNBC found that and gave us that rating. We are the only state to get that rating 2 years in a row. We have also gone from being ranked 50th to being ranked, I believe it's 23rd in the country for workers. So we've proven that we can do well by business and do well by workers, and we can continue that progress. So we've had this incredible surplus, and we also have $1 billion. When I mentioned earlier, we got $4 billion from the American Rescue Plan. We set aside $1 billion in case COVID shifts. So there's a lot of priorities that are going to come up against these funds. And I want to make sure that we continue to provide families and small businesses with the relief that everybody needs to make sure we recover from COVID in an equitable way. So that's a top priority. Second is making sure we continue to invest in our public K through 12. For the first time ever, Virginia is now investing at pre-recession levels in public K through 12, but we need to do more. We need to improve our school buildings and infrastructure, and we need to continue to make sure our teachers are well paid. We have to expand access to healthcare and healthcare coverage. And then also making sure, like I said earlier, looking at how we stabilize our childcare infrastructure and that so that women and working families are able to go back to work. So those are some of my priorities.
Okay, Mr. McGovern, Virginia ended the past fiscal year with a record $2.6 billion surplus. What are your thoughts about how this money should be allocated?
Well, Virginia is a very good place to do business, quite possibly if you're well connected. If you're a large corporation, you can see Amazon is coming to Virginia, richest guy in the world. He certainly is not coming here to pay more taxes. But as far as starting a business, Virginia is not that. At one time it was. I have several small business owners around my campaign. They are not happy. They're not doing well. I know people who want to start working out of their house. That's who I'm interested in. Start a very small business. That is very difficult, and getting ever more so, given the makeup that we have down in Richmond. The amount of money that we have there, yeah, we want to look at providing money for schools, for law enforcement. There's several things going on, but we need to take a close look at what's going on. Simply saying you're providing money to education, okay, you need to define what that's for. Okay, we're looking at paying for something like critical race theory, which is highly divisive. Judged by skin color situation, which is, if you talk to parents who feel less and less involved with schools, okay, they're not happy with that. Okay, the money's going for that kind of thing. It's going for a political agenda, along those lines. What we want to do, we want to make sure we have a strong rainy day fund. And we want to, we can cut tax rates, and actually that's going to keep taxes coming in strong.
And now we've come to our last question. Mr. McGovern, explain if there are opportunities for Democrats and Republicans to find common ground on any of the issues we discussed tonight.
Oh, I think there's certainly common ground for discussion, but we have to approach this across the entire spectrum. We have a problem with the schools with an effort to drive a conservative viewpoint out. I have talked to some supporters of my opponent who say they are just fine with that. I don't think that's her position. However, she has people who want to see conservative viewpoint driven out of schools. Public schools should offer us a complete spectrum. Okay, we need to have that. Something we have not discussed: election integrity. There's a lot of interest in having that. Okay, we can have that. Actually, the percent of people that want to have a voter ID is quite high. There's a lot of people who are tired of the constant questioning regarding the outcome of elections, depending on which other party wins. They don't like that. A very polarizing issue in Virginia in the 42nd, somewhat put us on the map, that we need an explanation for, is the question of choice. As I understand it, the definition of choice with my opponent is taxpayer funded through birth. That's a problem. Okay, we need to be able to talk about that and establish something. We want to look towards having a referendum so we can have a complete set of Virginia values for the 42nd, and where it stands now, it is not. Okay, and I think that would bring a lot of discussion together if we can get a handle on just what the definition of choice is.
Okay. Ms. Tran, explain if there are opportunities for Democrats and Republicans to find common ground on any of the issues we discussed tonight.
Thank you, Leslie. So I would, it's really interesting going into Richmond, and you think there's this huge split between the two parties, and we pass over thousands of bills each year, and the vast majority of the bills we do pass actually are passed unanimously or near unanimously. So there's a lot of agreement and opportunities for us to work together. There are some key issues where sometimes it's really hard to be able to find common ground, but I just want to highlight an example of where I got a bill passed unanimously. And, it was a little bit of a tussle in the beginning with some of our special advocates groups, but we got it through, which was to provide anti-discrimination protections in employment and housing and public accommodations for military service members, their spouses, dependents, and veterans. And that was a huge win and puts Virginia at the forefront of being welcoming and inclusive for our veterans and our military communities. And it's actually a bill that's being used right now, or a law that's being used right now as an example of what other states could do. So I'm really proud of that. Another opportunity for us where we have some agreement is raising teacher pay. I think that we all recognize the hard work that our teachers put in to help nurture and educate our kids, and making sure that they are paid well, and hopefully at a minimum at the national average or above. And I think that's you'll see in our budget work in the past several years where there's an agreement on that. But yeah, we do have some differences, and it's having a healthy conversation about what those differences are and the direction we should take as a Commonwealth is really important.
Okay, thank you both very much. Now it's time for the last part of our program, which is the closing statements by the candidates. Because Mr. McGovern went first on the opening statements, we'll start with Ms. Tran, who will have 2 minutes for a closing statement.
Great. Thank you so much, Leslie. And thank you again to the League of Women Voter team for organizing this conversation, and to everyone who's joined us to listen in and submitted questions. I really appreciate your time and commitment to having a robust dialogue in our electoral process. I think we stand at a really important crossroads right now as we work to recover safely from this pandemic. I think you heard that in the conversations tonight between the two of us, and that we have, I think, some clear differences in how we would approach issues that are really important to our community and to Virginia. I believe in science. I believe it is important that we follow science, listen to our doctors and the advice of the CDC in making sure that we recover safely. It's important that we provide relief to families who've struggled and have been impacted, as well as small businesses by this pandemic. That means a commitment to expanding healthcare, and yes, a commitment to reproductive healthcare access. I do believe that it is important that a woman is able to make decisions about her body and her health in consultation with her doctor without interference from politicians like myself. I believe that as we rebuild our economy, we have to make sure no one is left behind. That means shoring up our childcare infrastructure. That means as we could transition to a clean economy and a green economy, that we're doing so in an equitable way. And that means that as we look in a post-pandemic labor force, how work has been affected, that Virginians have the right skills and training they need to adjust to that new economy, new way of work. And also that we're welcoming and inclusive. LGBTQ Virginians, Asian Americans have been impacted throughout this time and continue to face attacks. So those are two examples, but making sure that we continue to be welcoming and inclusive in a place where no matter whom you love, whom you worship, where you live and where you are from, that you have opportunities to thrive. So I hope I've earned your support this November. Thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. McGovern, now your closing statement, please.
Hey, I appreciate the League of Women Voters providing the forum tonight, and I appreciate folks tuning in. I think that we have opportunities, take a look at this to include everybody. That is not the direction that we're heading. We're in an ever more polarized state. This was supposed to be cleared up. It is not. There's people who refer back to the previous incumbent in this job that they say they have quite a bit of respect for. But now everything seems to be quite one-sided. We have major issues in education. Again, I alluded to that the conservative viewpoint being driven out, but we seem to have, instead of a focus on academic excellence, preparing kids to be competitive and focusing on STEM and things along those lines, we get indoctrination. We get an emphasis on the 1%, on a kid who will enter a classroom and tell everybody what they can and can't say, particularly the teacher. You don't have classroom discipline there. Okay, we can see it in the test scores. Okay, we have a problem with education. We have a lot of unhappy teachers. Okay, and the key to this is include everybody. We can't have a single minded political opinion driving things, which is what has happened in education. We have ever more government involvement in the economy. The idea that you're going to provide child care and raise people's families, that takes resources away from people. Okay, so we have an issue there. We need to have a talk. Okay, we have a situation where we describe choice. That's not what's happening. Basically, we have an industry established in Virginia that it's unregulated, unrestricted. We finally found a business that the Democrats don't want to regulate. We need a definition there, and we need to work and have a discussion on that topic. Because right now, where it stands, it is not a woman talking with her doctor. Okay, right?
This brings us to the end of our candidate forum, and we'd like to thank Mr. McGovern and Ms. Tron for participating tonight, and we invite you in the audience to visit their campaign websites. We hope that the concerns and questions of our audience have been addressed and answered to your satisfaction. If you still have questions that we could not get to, or if you have any follow-up questions, please go to our website, lwv-fairfax.org, and look for candidate forums. You'll be able to submit questions there. Many election laws have changed this year, and we invite you to check out all the voter registration and election information on our website, as well as on vote411.org. Thank you all for being here. Voting has already begun, so please go and vote and encourage your family, your friends, your neighbors, anyone you know to go do the same. Good night, and thank you all.
All right, thanks again for the forum.
Recording stopped.